Free agency is officially underway in the NFL, and even on the first day, we already have some moves that'll have some major fantasy football implications. So let's get to it. Talk about the first signing. It's actually a re-signing. Aaron Jones, one of the big fish out there as far as running backs, and he went back to Green Bay. So staying put, which, well, disappointed a lot of fan bases. But let's talk about what this means, not just for Jones himself, because you think it's just more of the same, but this is going to have a domino effect because a lot of people were thinking A.J. Dillon was ready to break out and take over. That's not happening. And also, let's not forget, Jamal Williams is a free agent. It looks like, will not be coming back to Green Bay. So, Chris, what's your gut reaction to all this?
Well, my first reaction was not surprised because if you watched our free agency prediction video, I predicted that Aaron Jones would resign with the Packers. So, I hadn't really been drafting A.J. Dillon anywhere. Obviously, A.J. Dillon's now going to slot into the Jamal Williams role from a year ago. You got to think, because it's very unlikely that Jamal Williams will now be back with the Packers unless he just takes a ridiculously small deal. But you got to think he's going to go out into free agency now. So, in my opinion, in a 12-team, 14, 15 round draft, A.J. Dillon isn't even draftable anymore. He's nothing more than a bench handcuff. Aaron Jones remains what Aaron Jones was last year, a guy who's going to come in and off the field. He's still a good player. He's still in a good offense. Maybe like that 10 to 12 range as far as running backs. Jamal Williams is a guy I'm really intrigued to see because I think he could end up in a pretty good spot based on where he signs, and no one's really talking about him, and I think he could kind of fly under the radar and be one of those guys, one of those late round guys who you can pick up in your drafts who can have some decent fantasy value.
Yeah, so leaving Green Bay might actually turn out to be a good thing for Williams. Dillon seems like the loser in all this in terms of fantasy value. And, it kind of dashed everyone's dreams. And we thought Aaron Jones goes to a team like the Dolphins and becomes the main guy there. And then A.J. Dillon steps up and becomes the guy in Green Bay. And instead, well, Jones is kind of more of the same. And then, the Dolphins are probably going to sign somebody like Jamal Williams or somebody else and just share time with Gaskin. It's going to be a timeshare all around. Look, these things don't always work out maybe the way we want them to, but the takeaway is this. A.J. Dillon, no, he's never going to be the guy, the feature back there in Green Bay, and I don't think he should be. If you followed us earlier last season, I said a lot of this. A.J. Dillon is just not going to be a stud as a pro, all right? I understand that the thighs are impressive, but still. He isn't a guy who's got the pass-catching chops. He, isn't meant to be a feature back necessarily. All right. So he'll do more of the same. He's not undraftable, though, just because Aaron Jones is still there. Because if Williams is gone, he's going to provide the complementary role. He'll still get maybe 10 plus touches a game. If Aaron Jones is hurt, who's going to be the hottest pickup anywhere? It's going to be A.J. Dillon. So draft him late, especially if you need a handcuff for Jones. And then, as far as Jones himself, I think he's just kind of still maybe borderline top 10 running back. But just doesn't really move the needle as much as we thought it might. Let's talk about the Patriots making the biggest splash on day one, and not with any big fish necessarily, though. So they made a couple of signings to do what is sorely needed to improve their receiving core. But, the guys they got, talking about Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne at receiver, and then a tight end, and Jonnu Smith. Is this enough to make you think that the Patriots offense, pass offense especially, will be really much better in 2021?
Well, it's got to be better than it was last year. I mean, really the entire offense was just Cam Newton rushing for touchdowns. That was the whole offense. So it's got to be better. And don't forget, they still have Julian Edelman now. I know he's up there in age, but he still probably has a little juice left. And Aguilar actually was very good last year with the Raiders. Now, and Jonnu Smith, I think this is probably about the best spot Jonnu Smith could have landed, right? It's always good when a tight end goes to a team who doesn't really have an alpha wide receiver. We talk about it a lot. You look at Darren Waller there in Oakland or Las Vegas, sorry. They don't have an alpha wide receiver, and he tears it up. And now I don't expect Jonnu Smith to tear it up, but I think he's in the top 10 for me now, like right around that 9-10 range. I'm not going to bump him up too high. As for Nelson Aguilar, I mean, is it really any better than it was last year? I don't know if it's necessarily worse situation for him than last year, but I don't know if it's better. It's just kind of wherever he was. And Kendrick Bourne, I mean, yeah, I hope you're not drafting Kendrick Bourne anywhere.
Hopefully not. Look, the thing is, this is kind of the Patriots way as far as receivers. Think about it. Other than Randy Moss, that one time that they went and got Randy Moss, who at that time was still considered risky because you remember didn't really quite go over so well with the Raiders. But other than Moss, think about who have been some of the main receivers during the Belichick era. Deion Branch, Wes Welker, Julian Edelman. These are not high draft picks. These are not big name free agents. These are guys that just kind of got by. Now, that was with Tom Brady, granted, but still, the Patriots don't go out usually and get a big name at wide receiver. They make do with a core, right? A group of guys that will come out, right? Bring their lunch pail, do their job, and that's it. Aguilar did his job last year, career high, 18 yards per reception. He was used a lot as a deep threat. I don't know that that's going to work with Cam Newton at quarterback still, assuming he is a starting quarterback this year, and he did resign. My takeaway is this. I think the fact that they are investing in these pieces means N'Keal Harry is definitely going to be gone. I don't think that he is worth even a flyer at this point, because even if some other team tries to, use him as a reclamation project, it just looks like he's not panning out. All right. And the other thing is, I have a feeling the Patriots are going to draft a quarterback really early in the NFL draft, because re-signing Newton means he's going to be a placeholder. It's obvious he's not the guy who's going to lead them back to the Super Bowl at this point. But they're going to get a guy, I think maybe a Mac Jones. I don't know that that's good for the receivers that are there now. So I'm down on Aguilar based on this. I'm not super high on Jonnu Smith either. I don't think that the breakout is coming. All right, let's move on to Corey Davis going to the Jets. We knew the Jets needed a receiver. They still might draft one, but Corey Davis finally in the Devontae Parker mode. Took a few years and kind of had the type of season we thought he might have. But now that he's with the Jets, I mean, Chris, we don't really know who the quarterback is going to be for the Jets yet. So how do you feel about Corey Davis?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because, like you said, we don't know who the quarterback is yet. Now, if they go out and trade for Deshaun Watson, then gotta love Corey Davis, right? But if they, draft one of the rookies, then it's going to be a little more, questionable about him. But no one's really that high on Corey Davis anyways. No one was even high on him last year when he was putting up wide receiver 2 numbers. So I feel like for a guy who's being drafted as, really like a wide receiver 4, even a wide receiver 5, it's well worth the gamble. Again, if they do go out and trade for Deshaun Watson, or maybe even trade for Russell Wilson, or if whoever they draft ends up being a significant improvement, which you got to think they will be, this is good. And you got Denzel Mims on the other side, so we could see something similar to what we saw with A.J. Brown, Corey Davis last year in Tennessee, where Corey Davis doesn't have to be, the guy, which I think is better for him. So, I kind of do like it. It's not, I'm not super excited about Corey Davis now, but I think he's worth a speculative draft pick, as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, especially right now when, we don't know who the quarterback is, and it could get a lot better in, as far as that position goes.
Yeah, I mean, if they get Deshaun Watson, that would be ideal. Obviously, you want any receiver tied to him, but of course, we don't know if that's, even a possibility at this point. What if it's still Sam Darnold? You got to wonder, is that good? But we don't really know what that means. We don't know Sam Darnold, what he is or could be, without Adam Gase there kind of dragging the whole franchise down. So look, Davis is pretty much a flyer at this point. He's not going to be the focal point of the passing offense. So I feel like he's still worth a late pick in case they do happen to get Watson. Or what if they get a guy like Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, who takes off as a rookie and has, like Justin Herbert, that kind of season. So definitely worth a late risk, but don't get too excited. Not that you were anyways. Speaking of not exciting, what about Carlos Hyde to the Jags? I don't think he'll be drafted in a lot of fantasy leagues. Does this mean something either positive or negative for James Robinson?
I think it's a good thing for James Robinson. I'm not super high on James Robinson. I'm not drafting him like a top 10 running back, but I think he's dodged one bullet so far because, Carlos Hyde isn't a guy who's going to demand 15 plus touches or even 10 plus touches, really. He's just going to come in. He's going to spell James Robinson, when he needs a breather. So I think James Robinson has dodged bullet number 1, but there's still more free agents out there, and there's still the draft, so he's not quite out of the woodwork yet. But I think it is a step in the right direction for James Robinson heading into 2021.
Yeah, I think this is a great thing for James Robinson because it kind of indicates that they're not going to go after some of these running backs that they had been loosely tied to, through rumors. Like at Kenyon Drake, some people thought they might sign him and share the load with Robinson. If they're just settling for a guy like Hyde, who's now bounced around with, 5 different teams, including a very short and not too successful stint with the Jags. I'm almost surprised it took him back. You know what? This just shows that they're just getting somebody as depth, and that's it. Hyde is not going to threaten his workload. Now, they could take a running back in the middle or later rounds of the draft, and they had pretty good success with some undrafted running back from last year named James Robinson. So it is possible that they find a rookie that does share some time, but still, so far, really good for him. I'm moving him up just a tick in my preseason rankings. And now another re-signing here, Gronk back to the Bucs. I really thought this was it. He would be done. We know Tom Brady's never going to retire until he's removed from the front office and the franchise. But Gronk, kind of surprising he's back. Do you think he could still be a fantasy asset?
Yeah, we saw down the stretch last year and throughout the playoffs, he became a relatively good fantasy tight end. I think, he's probably rusty, which is understandable after a year off. So I think, going back into year 2 with the Bucs, with Brady, I think he'll be even better. I could see him being a top 12 tight end, which isn't saying a lot because it doesn't take a ton to be a top 12 tight end, score 6 to 8 touchdowns and catch 50 passes, and you'll be a top 12 tight end basically. But I think Gronk could be a top 12 tight end, and he's one of those guys who's really not being drafted in many leagues, in many drafts right now, in your standard draft. So if you're waiting on tight end or if you miss out on the big tight ends, I think Gronk's a decent add in your tight end spot.
Yeah, and I'll just say that last year I wanted nothing to do with Gronk. I thought he was going to be a major draft bust, and kind of missed the mark there. But I'm still probably not going to draft him anywhere this year either, just because I don't expect that much. And OJ Howard is going to be back, although Cameron Brate might be gone through free agency, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm still probably not going to have Gronk anywhere this year. And then not an official free agent move, but a lot of talk about the Saints here because we don't know where Jameis Winston is officially going to play next year. We know that Drew Brees is now retired, and Taysom Hill has a contract that is interesting. 4 years, something about $140 million, but there's a lot of interesting incentives there. So we don't know exactly who the quarterback is going to be. We think it's going to be Hill. What do you make of the Saints offense as far as what we know right now, at least without Brees?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's reports that they do want Winston to still be the starter, which I have trouble believing, because if you wanted Winston to be the starter, why didn't you start him last year when Drew Brees was injured and you had him right there to start him? Like if you didn't think he was good enough to start last year, why is he all of a sudden good enough to start this year? And I do think it's going to be Taysom Hill as a starter, which I think is fine. I think either way, Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill is good for Michael Thomas. Obviously, Jameis Winston would be great for Michael Thomas because we know Jameis Winston is fantastic for his wide receivers, kind of like Ryan Fitzpatrick. But even with Taysom Hill last year, Michael Thomas was fine. So I think Michael Thomas will be okay either way. Alvin Kamara is the one, obviously, that this decision is really going to affect him, right? Because with Jameis Winston, look, no matter whether it's Winston or Hill, it's not going to be as good for Kamara as it was with Brees, okay? He averaged like 8 targets a game with Drew Brees. That's ridiculous. He's not going to get all those dump offs, whether it's Winston or Taysom Hill. I do think he'll be a little bit better with Jameis Winston. I think if Jameis Winston was the guy, I'd probably slot him in that 6 to 7 range. If it's Taysom Hill, I don't even know if I'll have him in my top 10. I mean, I'll have to really think about it, but certainly Taysom Hill would be very bad for Alvin Kamara's value.
Wow, that's a pretty bold take from a guy that was arguably the best, most valuable player in fantasy football last year, especially with that huge 6 touchdown game. Alvin Kamara, not even a top 10 pick. That's pretty spicy, but we'll see what plays out. Look, I agree. Winston, I mean, why would he want to come back? There's plenty of teams that would probably give him more chance to play. They didn't show a lot of faith in him. Also should be noted, Emmanuel Sanders for the Saints was released. That was purely salary cap driven. So it'll be interesting to see if they do draft a receiver. That might be somebody who kind of flies under the radar as a strong value pick, especially if a guy like Winston, who's a gunslinger, is the quarterback. All right, thanks for joining us. We'll be here all preseason to break down major moves, especially through free agency and the NFL draft. Hit that subscribe button and don't miss a thing.